You know, it was a really cool experience growing up in the 90s. And one of my favorite things was Nickelodeon, especially the TV show, Are You Afraid of the Dark? Which had just the perfect amount of spookiness. I mean, Goosebumps would come out a few years later and have its own TV show. But so coming from a guy who actually grew up in that time, it was more of a polished creepiness. Whereas Are You Afraid of the Dark had a more lo-fi, grungy, kind of like muddy creepiness that really, even as a kid, I could differentiate and appreciate and drew more towards. And one of my favorite episodes of all time is The Tale of the Pinball Wizard. And it's about this kid, Ross, who's kind of like the loner type. And, he's one of those guys who can, manage on his own. And at the jump from the narration, it's kind of said with a negative connotation. And he's trying to work at this shop for Mr. Olson. And Mr. Olson don't like kids. And, really you just kind of see like this kid is living in a world. It's like an old school. How people used to talk about like the 1950s or something, where like, boy, old people really didn't like kids, and they could like justifiably like, wink, wink, get rid of them. But, this Mr. Olson's all like, get out of here. I don't want you here. And, he's like, hey, can you just give me a chance? Let me prove myself, this and that. It's like, okay, well, don't play the game. But he knew Ross was going to play the game. So, long story short, he plays the game and, awesome. He beats the game. And then at the end, he's like punished by the god, Mr. Olson, to play the game forever. And, as a kid, you watch this and you go like, whoa, this is creepy. I mean, seriously, I remember seeing this for the first time back in the day. And I would just be like, whoa, that is so fucking creepy and totally awesome, and I felt sorry for Ross. I mean, I don't know if there was a kid who wouldn't have felt sorry for Ross, because it seemed unjust. It seemed like, hey man, this guy, even though since the jump they were talking this negative connotation about his character, when you're watching the show, he's 100% likable. You're rooting for him. And you kind of question what's being painted of him is got to be wrong. So at the end, he's doomed to play the game over and over. And you see the pinball coming, and he's like, uh-oh. And then kind of like at the end, the whole thesis of the story is like, hey, you can play the game. Just make sure the game doesn't get you, And I say all this because I also want to bring in another thought to it. Because, during the epidemic of 2020, when everybody was, kind of locked down, that's when I got acquainted with the philosophy of Albert Camus, and especially his writing, The Myth of Sisyphus. It's like it asks the reader to majorly think outside the box and consider, what if you were cursed for eternity, but you were able to rethink your curse as a blessing or a gift and then actually enjoy and like it. And I know that's a very deep, thought-provoking, philosophical topic, but I was very attracted to his anti-suicidal approach to life, no matter how hard or unjust it might seem. It's better to just go have another cup of coffee or to even live life happily out of spite. And so then a couple years later, maybe 2 or 3 years later, when I was revisiting this show, Tale of the Pinball Wizard, it dawned on me. I was like, hold on. What if this is like an Albert Camus philosophy moment here? As a kid growing up, I always thought, whoa, he's in hell. He's doomed to do it all over again and forever and ever, even when he wins. But then looking at it after, being acquainted with the philosophy and kind of looking at it from an adult perspective, I was like, whoa, so you can actually look at this Again, it's all about the way your outlook is, your way your perspective is. And you could see like this is like, whoa, Ross, yeah, he was doomed to play the game over and over again forever. But like Albert Camus suggested, we have to imagine Sisyphus happy. You know, and that's just a really cool outlook. And I don't know, when I was revisiting this series, and after that dawned on me, I just started to like kind of look at him differently. Yeah, so hope you enjoyed this video. I plan on reviewing some more episodes, ones that really strung a chord with me growing up in the future. You know, they have all those Myth of Sisyphus t-shirts, and I'm just waiting for somebody to make a Myth of Ross Campbell t-shirt, like for Are You Afraid of the Dark? I think that'd be so awesome.